The capture of drug trafficker Ismael Mayo Zambada by U.S. authorities continues to leave certain questions unresolved, although several theories have emerged. One of the most important is that he may have turned himself in order to see his children. Those who are in the United States are still unclear regarding Zambada Garcia's arrest, a week after it occurred in El Paso, Texas, with the case against him beginning on Thursday, August 1st. However, various specialists in drug trafficking in Mexico have taken on the task of gathering the necessary evidence and analyzing what happened on July 25th. Remember that at 76 years old, Ismael Zambada suffers from diabetes and possibly cancer. In addition to losing his sight, his greatest wish could be to be with his children one last time. It is worth mentioning that in the United States, he finds Vicente Zambada Niebla, alias El Vicentillo, who is his favorite son, being a protected witness for the authorities after testifying in the trial of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, which is why he cannot leave the country. Serafin Zambada Ortiz, another of his sons, is a U.S. citizen and faced charges in that country, making his situation complicated. It is believed that Ismael Zambada Imperial, alias Mayo Gordo, is also in the United States. Although several records indicate that he was deported in 2022 after serving a sentence, the last ingredient in this theory is his brother, Jesus Reynaldo Zambada, the king, who, according to specialists, is in prison. Although other versions indicate that he was released after testifying in El Chapo's trial. For this reason, the idea that he could have reached an agreement with the DEA in order to from reuniting with his family once again to something he can achieve before illness and age rob him of his mobility. Other versions indicate that it could have been a betrayal by the Chapitos so they could free his brother, who was extradited in 2023. Finally, there's talk of the possibility of a covert operation by the DEA, managing to capture the drug trafficker in Mexico and smuggle him clandestinely to the United States. Although, if it were a handover by El Mayo Zambada, the narrative could be based on the kidnapping by Joaquín Guzmán Lora, so as not to be seen as a traitor to the faction he founded. But the reality of a handover is the closest, considering his health. Ismael El Mayo Zambada appeared this Thursday for the second time before the federal court in El Paso, Texas. The kingpin of the Sinaloa cartel appeared before Judge Kathleen Cardone. Seated in a wheelchair, as he did the first hearing, he was wearing a blue sweatshirt and orange flip-flops. The 76-year-old drug trafficker displayed a hospital bracelet on one of his arms. The hearing was held this Thursday, 1 week after the drug lord's surprise fall. He was arrested on June 25th at a private airport on the border between Texas and New Mexico. The capture of Zambada and Joaquín Guzmán López, one of the sons of El Chapo Guzmán, has been framed by Washington as part of the fight by U.S. authorities against fentanyl trafficking. So far, there are no details that clearly explain whether the capture of the legendary drug trafficker was a surrender to authorities or a kidnapping, as claimed by Zambada's lawyer. The family mausoleum of Damaso López Núñez, successor to Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, who is the leader of the Sinaloa cartel and imprisoned in a U.S. prison since 2017, has been desecrated for the second time in a week. On Monday, unknown individuals entered the El Dorado Cemetery in southern Sinaloa. They destroyed the graves of López Núñez's father and brother and stole the bodies that have not yet appeared. This Wednesday, the cemetery was vandalized again, and according to videos posted on social media and reported by the local press, they have left the chapel practically in ruins. No one has filed a legal complaint. Since the first assault, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has announced the opening of an investigation, but there is still no new information. Local authorities have reinforced the security of the mausoleum, according to the local press, who has failed to prevent the new desecration that has occurred while Ismael El Mayo Zambada, leader of the Sinaloa cartel, and Joaquín Guzmán López, son of El Chapo, begin their legal process after their capture in the United States, surrounded by doubts surrounding their arrest. José Luis González Mesa, who has presented himself as a lawyer for the family of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, assured in a statement that Ismael El Mayo Zambada and Joaquín Guzmán López surrendered after the arrest. Negotiating with U.S. authorities began approximately 4 years ago with U.S. authorities about the possibility of the group's voluntary surrender. This was stated in a statement released by journalist Cecina Uresti. In an interview with Gonzales Mesa, she denied that her client's son betrayed Zambada and kidnapped him, but she accepted the reports of a pact with U.S. agencies as true. The statement also states that the relationship between the two families has been impeccable, as well as with other factions of the Sinaloa cartel, such as those led by Rafael Caro Quintero and Aureliano Guano Guzmán, brother of El Chapo. The statements contradict what Jeffrey Lichman, the Guzmán family's attorney in the United States, stated that there was no agreement with the government after Guzmán Lopez's first appearance in the United States. Lichman also dismissed the comments. Frank Perez, Zambada's legal representative in that country, regarding an alleged kidnapping. When lawyers try to score points with the media with accusations like these, I ignore them because they make no sense. Gonzales Mesa, a controversial figure who has presented himself as El Chapo's lawyer for at least a decade, also exonerated the Mexican government of the alleged deal between the cartel leaders and U.S. authorities. The arrest was made without any coercion or pressure, he added, and dismissed the possibility of a violent confrontation between the different factions of the organization. Contradictions continue regarding how the arrest of both drug traffickers took place last Thursday in New Mexico. The judge in charge of the case of Ismael El Mayo Zambada has ordered that the drug trafficker be held in prison without bail. Judge and Burton stated that there are no conditions that ensure the defendant's appearance or the safety of the community, according to a court order from a Texas court. The drug lord was arrested last Thursday, along with Joaquín Guzmán Lopez, son of El Chapo Guzmán. The following day, Zambada appeared in court in the border city of El Paso, seen in a wheelchair, according to the hearing transcripts. He pleaded not guilty to a battery of drug trafficking and organized crime charges. The drug lord also waived his right to appear at a preliminary hearing scheduled for this Wednesday. Another hearing is scheduled for Thursday and will be key to determining the next steps of the judicial process in the United States. Sonora Governor Alfonso Durazo assured that the plane that carried Ismael El Mayo Zambada and Joaquín Guzmán Lopez, son of El Chapo Guzmán, did not take off from Hermosillo. An aircraft took off from the state capital here, and the characteristics of the aircraft reported by American authorities that carried the two individuals who have already been repeatedly mentioned by the media are simply different. At a press conference, the aircraft that landed at a rural airport in New Mexico last Thursday had 2 engines, while the small plane that was thought to match those characteristics had only 1 engine, according to Durazo. However, the governor asked local authorities to strengthen surveillance at clandestine airports and airstrips. We have not identified a Cessna 182 in Sonora that took off from Hermosillo with 2 engines and transported those individuals. He insisted that the plane that transported El Mayo and Guzmán Lopez from New Mexico to Texas is under the custody of the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, in English, and as part of the investigation by the Attorney General's office, has opened a file to investigate the private flight. The 76-year-old drug trafficker has pleaded not guilty to all charges, including cocaine trafficking, fentanyl, heroin, and money laundering. During an initial appearance in the United States, El Mayo's family has insisted that the arrest was actually a kidnapping to hand him over to U.S. justice. His Texas-based attorney, Frank Perez, reiterated the Zambada family's version on Tuesday. Mayo was kidnapped by armed individuals and taken to the United States against his will, López Obrador asserted in an interview with Univision. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has ruled out violent confrontations following the arrests of Zambada and Guzmán Lopez, urging drug trafficking groups not to resort to violence to resolve their internal conflicts. "We do not want violence in our country," López Obrador said in his morning press conference this morning. The Attorney General's office has announced that it will open an investigation to clarify the details of the arrest of Zambada and Guzmán Lopez and to determine whether there were any irregularities in the procedure. Mexican authorities continue to offer no verdict. Official information on how the two drug traffickers were captured and the preliminary details provided by U.S. authorities have raised more questions than answers. The New York Times reported that Zambada was tricked by Guzmán Lopez into coming out of hiding. And after being captured, the official version of events remains uncertain, with multiple versions and speculation about the arrest of both Sinaloa cartel bosses. There is a new twist in the story of one of the most notorious drug traffickers in recent history. The lawyer for the leader of the Sinaloa cartel has announced that his client was violently kidnapped by Joaquín Guzmán Lopez. My client did not surrender nor negotiate any agreement with the U.S. government. This is a twist for the coming days. The possibility that Guzmán Lopez could benefit from the surrender. Mayo Zambada will appear in the U.S. courts that already tried his father in 2019 and sentenced him to life imprisonment. The enigmatic capture of two Sinaloa cartel bosses without firing a single shot has given rise to various theories, from the surrender of a sick and cornered drug lord to the betrayal of his former partner's son at 7:55 a.m. An American pilot took off from the Hermosillo Airport in the state of Sonora in northern Mexico just over 2 hours later. The plane landed at a small private airport near the border city of El Paso, Texas, with 2 passengers on board. Both were arrested by federal agents upon landing in the United States. They were Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garcia, who had been at the top of the drug trade for more than 30 years, and Joaquín Guzmán Lopez, one of his sons. Of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán was more than. Beyond these details, the story of the enigmatic capture of these 2 Sinaloa cartel bosses last Thursday, without firing a single shot, remains. A story full of hollow suspicions and contradictions. Mexican drug lord Ismael El Mayo Zambada faces at least 4 legal proceedings in different United States courts with sentences that could condemn him to spend the rest of his life in prison in Texas. Zambada is one of the 24 drug trafficking leaders accused in 2012 of 38 crimes. The prosecution is accusing Zambada and Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, who is currently serving a life sentence in a United States prison for leading the Sinaloa cartel and participating in cocaine trafficking, money laundering, kidnappings, and murders. The accusation accuses him of being responsible for the importation and the distribution of thousands of kilos of cocaine and marijuana to the United States between 2000 and 2012 through various transportation routes, including the international bridge between Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, Mexico, and El Paso, Texas. Zambada and El Chapo are also accused of masterminding the 2009 murder of American drug trafficker Sergio Saucedo, who was allegedly kidnapped in Texas, transported to Mexico, and mutilated for losing a marijuana shipment. Last February, prosecutors updated the charges against Zambada in a Western District of New York court, where he faces 17 drug trafficking charges. The U.S. justice system accuses him of leading the Sinaloa cartel, an organization through which he has trafficked several tons of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana, generating billions of dollars. This case is the only one. This includes a new charge raised by the Department of Justice regarding trafficking in fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid that has caused a serious overdose crisis in the United States and has become the center of anti-drug policy. Zambada is also accused of hiring hitmen who committed hundreds of violent acts to strengthen his power within the organization and punish disloyalty and failure. In 2002, Zambada was charged with drug trafficking in a District of Columbia court along with his son, Vicente Zambada Niebla, known as El Vicentillo, and his former right-hand man, Javier Torres Felix. According to the report by District Attorney Patrick Hearn, the defendants allegedly conspired since 1992 to import 5 kilograms or more of a mixture containing cocaine and to manufacture and distribute 5 kilograms or more of said mixture with the intent and knowledge that it would be distributed illegally in the United States. The document also cites violations of law for complicity and confiscation and describes the collaboration between the Sinaloa cartel and Colombian drug traffickers who supplied tons of cocaine to Mexican traffickers until the end of 1997. Since 2014, Zambada faces 4 charges in a California court along with 2 of his sons. Ismael Zambada Y. Kairos, known as El Mayo Flaco, who has never been arrested. Ismael Zambada Imperial, known as El Mayo Gordo, who was extradited to the United States in 2019 and released in 2022 since 2005. Mayo deliberately participated in a criminal enterprise to violate drug trafficking laws, according to the brief of then-prosecutor Laura Duffy. The co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel allegedly conspired to traffic or distribute in the United States more than 150 kilograms of cocaine, more than 100 kilograms of marijuana, more than 1 kilo of heroin, and more than 500 g of methamphetamine. Almost a week after the capture of Ismael El Mayo Zambada and Joaquín Guzmán Lopez in the United States, the inhabitants of Sinaloa live in a tense environment, with a question that remains unanswered: whether the version suggesting an alleged betrayal by the Chapitos is true. Why has the faction of the co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel not yet reacted? The events of last Thursday, July 25th, in El Paso, Texas, have left numerous unknowns, although the lawyers for both bosses have stated that their clients do not have any agreement with the United States. Several journalists specializing in drug trafficking maintain that the most credible version is the one that points to the sons of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán as those responsible for the betrayal. One of these journalists is Johan Grillo, who in an interview with Claudio Ochoa for Latin has stated that Iván Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo Guzmán Salazar are already waiting for a response from the gang. One of the questions that has been raised is why there hasn't been a stronger reaction if the Chapos really handed El Mayo over to the United States. Why hasn't there been a bloodbath in Sinaloa? A source linked to the Chapos who operates in Baja California and was previously in Sonora affirms that they are tense, they are ready, and they have many people in Culiacán. He stated that in 2008, the Sinaloa cartel went through a similar situation when the Beltran Leva brothers accused Joaquín Guzmán of handing Alfredo, alias El Machomo, over to the authorities. The conflict between the two sides lasted for several years, but it didn't start immediately, according to Joan Grillo. It took the Beltrans around 3 months to start the war. They took their time planning and organizing, and then came revenge against El Chapo's son. So it could be that the reaction won't be immediate. They will calculate their moves, he added. According to Grillo and journalist Juan Alberto Cedillo, the El Chapo gang members allegedly managed to get Zambada Garcia to meet with them in Culiacán for an urgent meeting with a local businessman. Journalist Anibal Hernandez pointed out that the 76-year-old drug lord accepted the meeting because he didn't want conflict with the El Chapo gang members. A supposed former member of El Mayo's security team stated that the ambush of the prominent drug trafficker took place in the Huertos del Pedregal neighborhood near the city of Bella Vista and the Tres Rios urban development. Upon entering the house, armed men linked to Guzmán Lopez overpowered 4 bodyguards, who are still missing. They are possibly dead, Grillo reported. Another member of his personal team and his assistant allegedly managed to escape. This version coincides with the statements of Frank Perez, El Mayo's lawyer, who maintains that his client was forcibly transferred to U.S. territory. He was ambushed, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed by 6 men in military uniforms. Joaquín tied his legs and placed a black bag over his head. Then, they put him in the back of a pickup truck. They took him to a landing strip, forced him onto a plane, and took him to the United States against his will. Meanwhile, the government of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has decided to reinforce the presence of the armed forces with a deployment of 400 additional troops in the capital of Sinaloa. The scorching midday sun intensely illuminated the small town of Alamo, hidden in the Sierra de Sinaloa. The news of the death of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the legendary leader of the Sinaloa cartel, had spread rapidly, filling the atmosphere with an expectant and heavy silence. With more than 3 decades at the head of drug trafficking, his death marked the end of an era and raised countless questions about the future of the cartel. El Mayo's funeral became an event laden with symbolism and mystery. The estrellas and dusty streets of the town, normally quiet, were now filled with vehicles and armed men, a sign of the deceased's importance and of caution against possible threats. This local church stood as the epicenter of the mourning, surrounded by a crowd that approached to pay its respects. Tribute to one of the most notorious drug lords in recent Mexican history. The atmosphere became even denser and more significant with the arrival of the Chapitos, the sons of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. Their presence at the funeral was not only a sign of respect, but also a gesture of unity at a critical moment. As the funeral procession moved toward the church, the gazes of those present turned. They focused on them, observing every movement, every gesture, looking for clues about the future of the cartel. The sound of murmurs faded as the priest began the homily, filling the room with words of comfort and reflection. Koba's coffin, surrounded by wreaths of white and red flowers, symbolized both the peace and the violence that had marked El Mayo's life. Meanwhile, in the front row, the imperturbable faces of the Chapitos reflected the weight of the legacy and burdens that now fell on their shoulders. The ceremony progressed in an atmosphere of solemnity and respect, while outside the church, the security operation remained alert, reminding everyone that despite the mourning, the reality of drug trafficking did not stop. The funeral of Ismael El Mayo Zambada was not only the last farewell to a leader, but also a harbinger of the challenges and changes that would come. The capture of Ismael El Zambada and Joaquín Guzmán Lopez in the United States has triggered a series of events that have shaken the foundations of drug trafficking and raised a series of questions without definitive answers. The current situation in Sinaloa, marked by a tense calm and an atmosphere of uncertainty, is the result of an intricate web of betrayals, revenge, and internal struggles that appear to be reaching a critical point. The dynamics behind this capture and the possible repercussions are complex and reflect the evolution of drug trafficking in Mexico and its international implications. The capture of Mayo Zambada and Joaquín Guzmán Lopez in the United States without gunfire or violent confrontations is a palpable manifestation of the change in strategies to combat drug trafficking. Unlike the brutal methods the arrests that used to characterize these operations, the nonviolent arrest underscores the sophistication and planning currently involved in the fight against organized crime. The capture itself is an event laden with symbolism. It represents not only the end of an era of power for the Sinaloa cartel, but also a shift in the power dynamics of global drug trafficking. The various theories surrounding the capture of these two prominent figures highlight the complex webs of loyalties and betrayals within drug trafficking. The possibility of betrayal by the Chapitos, the sons of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, adds an additional layer of intrigue and mystery. The lack of an immediate response from the Mayo Zambada faction suggests a period of recalibration and strategic assessment. Recent history shows that internal disputes between rival factions can lead to protracted and bloody conflicts, as seen in the recent past. With the Beltrans, Leva, and Guzmán, it was in 2008. The fact that the response has not been immediate could indicate that the Chapitos are taking a calculated approach, planning their next move with strategic precision. Drug trafficking has evolved significantly in recent decades. The role of the cartels has changed, and with it the tactics used to maintain control over trafficking routes and operations. The fact that the capture of El Mayo and Guzmán Lopez was carried out without violence is indicative of a new phase in the fight against drug trafficking, where diplomacy and negotiation play an increasingly important role. New actors like the Chapitos are reshaping the drug trafficking landscape by introducing new power dynamics and challenges. The capture of such influential figures has significant implications for the state of Sinaloa and the Mexican government. The Mexican government's reinforcement of the armed forces in the region underscores the importance of maintaining control and avoiding a power vacuum that could be exploited by other factions or criminal groups. The additional military presence in the region is a preventative measure to ensure that the capture of these leaders does not trigger a wave of violence or stabilization. This event also has implications for counter-drug policy in both Mexico and the United States. The capture of prominent drug trafficking leaders can be seen as a success for authorities, but it also raises questions about the long-term effectiveness of current strategies. The arrest of Mayo and Guzmán Lopez highlights the need for more comprehensive approaches that not only focus on capturing leaders, but also on reducing drug demand and improving the socioeconomic conditions that fuel drug trafficking. Ismael Mayo Zambada and Joaquín Guzmán Lopez have highlighted the complexities of modern drug trafficking and the power dynamics at play. The tense atmosphere in Sinaloa, speculation about internal betrayals, and the strengthening of the military presence are indicative of a critical stage in the fight against organized crime. This event underscores the need for multifaceted strategies that address not only the criminal aspect, but also the underlying causes of drug trafficking. The situation continues to evolve. The answers to current questions can define the future of the region and of international anti-drug policies.